The equator is an imaginary line that circles the Earth, dividing it into the northern and southern hemispheres. While doing this, it passes through 13 countries on 3 different continents. While these countries are completely diverse, they have one thing in common, which is poverty, stemming from a lack of development capabilities and economic growth. How is it possible that these 13 countries located in Asia, Africa, and South America are faced with the same plague? And what are those factors hindering the economic growth of some of these countries? Join us in this video as we delve in. Although the equator spans 24,901 miles around the globe, it passes through only 13 countries. These include 7 African nations: São Tomé and Príncipe, Gabon, the Republic of the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Uganda, and Somalia. In South America, the equator crosses Ecuador, Brazil, and Colombia. In Asia, it passes through Indonesia, the Maldives, and Kiribati. As we said earlier, some of what those countries have in common is the fact that they are mostly considered poor, with the exception of just a few. This has been attributed to so many factors by economists over the years who have tried to find a connection between factors like the geographic pattern of these countries and their economic development. Geography plays a significant role in the economic development of any country. According to popular economist Jeffrey Sachs, countries located in the Northern Hemisphere are richer and better developed compared to countries located on the equator, and there's a reason for that. Countries along the equator have relatively warmer climates compared to countries north of the equator, like the United States and Russia, which have colder climates. This is because the warm temperatures come with consistent daylight year-round along with a lot of rainfall. While this can be beneficial for rainforests, it presents challenges for farming. The seasons in these regions often alternate between heavy rains and dry spells. While the rains are essential for crops, too much can lead to floods and soil erosion, while the dry periods bring water shortages which would prevent crops from flourishing. The warm, moist environment also makes these areas prone to pests and plant diseases, which can make farming more difficult. And what is a country without enough to feed itself? Apart from food, building and maintaining infrastructure into equatorial regions can be tough. The constant heat, high humidity, and heavy rainfall wear down roads, bridges, and buildings faster than in colder climates. This makes it difficult and expensive to develop infrastructure, particularly in remote areas. All these phenomena allow the countries with colder climates to develop more vigorously. For countries like São Tomé and Príncipe, their geographical location has played a huge role in deterring their economic development. It's a small island developing state off the coast of Central Africa, with a population of 225,000 people. The country depends mostly on imports due to the inadequacy of local food production to meet the needs of the population. The country is also highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, depending mostly on imports, and faces development challenges resulting from structural vulnerabilities, including limited private sector investments. Employment is mainly informal, consisting largely of work in agriculture, fisheries, and small-scale commerce due to its geographic isolation and the small size of the national market. Another important factor is disease. Most countries on the equator have a temperate climate, unlike other countries that are far away from the equator, which means they experience warmer temperatures year-round, thereby creating a hotspot for diseases like malaria to thrive. Especially in Africa, the treatment of malaria diseases caused by mosquito bites has drastically affected the total economic development of many countries. It is estimated that malaria treatment causes African countries a loss of over $12 billion in lost domestic product every year. Due to this, it is estimated the disease has slowed economic growth in Africa by 1.3% per year as a result of lost life and lower productivity. On the other hand, in South American countries like Brazil, one of the diseases that has caused a major impact on the country's economic development is the dengue disease, also caused by a mosquito bite. According to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, at least 12.9% of the population reported already having had dengue in their life in 2013, mostly described as the lower class population. This disease had significantly affected a good percentage of the Brazilian population, specifically the productive workforce, due to an increase in work absenteeism and, to some extent, an increase in death. Agriculture is also an important factor to discuss. Countries located on the equator have a productive soil with a diverse climate that supports the production of several staple food and cash crops. Unfortunately, they mostly depend on a non-mechanized system for their agricultural practices. This means these countries barely meet the demands of their population with nothing or just a little left for export. The lack of technological innovation in these countries has affected their ability to adapt to the rapidly changing climate conditions. The level of agricultural production in these countries has significantly reduced to a subsistence nature. Based on their geographical location, most of these countries are situated in areas with important raw materials, like gas and oil found in Ecuador and Colombia, and cobalt found in the DRC. These raw materials are very essential for the world's industrial growth, as they are high in demand. Unfortunately, these countries fail to benefit from these raw materials. Why? It's mainly because of corruption. While environmental and geographic challenges play their role, the pervasive issue of political instability is one of the most significant factors contributing to poverty in many countries along the equator. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, for instance, is a prime example of how political instability can cripple economic growth and entrenched poverty. Despite being one of the richest countries in the world in terms of natural resources, boasting vast reserves of minerals such as cobalt and diamonds, the DRC remains one of the poorest nations. Decades of political instability and civil war have prevented the country from capitalizing on its wealth. Since the end of Belgian colonial rule in 1960, the DRC has experienced a series of military coups, authoritarian regimes, and ongoing armed conflicts, particularly in the eastern regions. These conflicts have devastated the country's infrastructure and disrupted economic activities, especially in the mining sector. The constant threat of violence has deterred foreign investors, and domestic businesses struggle to operate in such an unpredictable environment. The lack of political stability means there's no continuity in development policies, and progress is often reversed when new leaders come to power. Consequently, millions of Congolese remain trapped in extreme poverty, despite the country's abundant resources. Somalia is another example of how political instability weakens institutions and perpetuates poverty. Since the collapse of the central government in 1991, Somalia has been engulfed in civil war, clan-based conflict, and the rise of extremist groups like Al-Shabaab. The absence of functioning governments for nearly 2 decades resulted in the disintegration of institutions responsible for providing essential public services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure development. All these result in corruption which undermines economic growth, weakens institutions, and diverts resources away from development. Countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo illustrate how corruption by high-ranking officials worsens poverty by limiting public services, discouraging investment, and fostering inequality. One of the most direct effects of corruption is the misallocation and theft of public funds. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for instance, years of corrupt leadership under former President Joseph Kabila saw billions of dollars in public money disappear. Between 2013 and 2018, an estimated $4.3 billion was lost through embezzlement and mismanagement, funds that could have been invested in much-needed infrastructure, education, and healthcare to further develop the country. Instead, the DRC remains one of the poorest countries in the world, with inadequate roads, schools, and medical facilities, despite its vast natural resources. The effect of unstable governance in Somalia is also corruption which became rampant, and many regions were controlled by warlords and militias rather than state institutions. This institutional collapse severely limited access to social services, leaving millions of Somalis without proper healthcare or education. The United Nations estimates that more than 70% of Somalia's population lives in poverty, a direct consequence of the country's long-standing political turmoil. This isn't about the DRC alone. Almost every country on the equator suffers from bad governance and corruption, as they turn to exploitation sites for other powerhouse countries, as these abundant raw materials are mostly benefited by other countries. To make things worse, the side effects of these mining operations have dramatically affected the local population, with no policies set in place to address the situation. The exploitation of some of these natural resources, like the rainforest, through deforestation, has affected the economic development of countries like Ecuador. It has caused water scarcity, loss of biodiversity, and most importantly, the livelihoods of the local population that depends significantly on the forest and its resources for their survival. Most of these local populations are forced to fall below the poverty level, finding it hard to meet their basic daily needs. This is just an example of the several side effects faced by the local population due to the exploitation of natural resources. Earlier, we said all countries on the equator are struggling with persistent poverty. However, Indonesia is determined to break free from this cycle. Despite its equatorial location, the nation has been actively working to rise above the poverty line. Since recovering from the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s, Indonesia has experienced impressive economic growth, positioning itself as an exception in this trend. They have set policies in place to help them systematically improve their economic growth. Indonesia was recently named among the world's top 10 in terms of purchasing parity, making a significant gain in reducing poverty. It has reduced its poverty rate by more than half since 1999 to less than 10% in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic. Indonesia's poverty level as of March 2023 was 9.36%, after it rose to 10.2% in September 2020. With Indonesia trying to defy expectations about our assumption of countries on the equator, maybe as time goes on, other countries will follow suit. As we've seen, the struggles faced by countries along the equator stem from a combination of natural and man-made challenges. While geography and climate present unavoidable obstacles, many of the factors holding these nations back, such as corruption, poor infrastructure, and disease, are problems we can and should address. Indonesia stands out as an example of a country that's making strides in overcoming these hurdles, proving that progress is possible despite the odds. Will other equatorial nations follow its path to economic growth? Can Indonesia fulfill its potential as a future economic powerhouse? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful videos.